The Oscars are nearly upon us, a night of glitz and glam where Hollywood gives itself a well-earned pat on the back and rewards itself in an overly self-absorbed manner. You might say, I'm not a massive fan of the Oscars. I've always felt, and I know many people share my thoughts, that the ones that win the best picture are usually the films that make the most noise publicly, instead of, the best film released in that year. Of course, I would be naive if I didn't realise this is how it exactly works, and studios throw millions of dollars at Oscar campaigns for their film to win, and it is essentially a form of politics in order to get your film nominated and even win. When it was released, I knew this film was going to be high on the list of films to be considered by the Academy, due to its subject matter and the amount of buzz and hype surrounding the film. This film was Joker. Joker is a film which, in my opinion, panders to the Academy. Whilst I did enjoy the film and will watch it again, and do recommend it to people, I don't think it is one of the best films made this year, nor did it really have an effect on cinema, or actually have much interesting points to say, which is something people seem to think very differently on. A big consensus of general audiences and less so critics feel that Joker was an incredible insight into today's society and held a mirror up to our world and showed people how broken everything is. A lot of critics, and even myself, and I am not a critic, felt this wasn't the case. However, Joker does deserve Oscar nominations. The best score nomination is thoroughly well deserved for Hilda, I'm not going to attempt her surname, whose score gives an amazing eerie feeling to the world of Gotham and gives the film another dimension of tension and anxiety inducing feeling to the film. The best cinematography nomination is thoroughly well deserved as well, and for me was the best part of this film. The world of Gotham is grubby, dark and claustrophobic. I think Joker gives the best representation of Gotham that has been seen in film. It felt like Gotham from Batman comics had jumped off the page and onto the screen, and the cinematography really makes the city of Gotham feel like another character, and we the audience feel submerged into this film. But why do I not think Joker deserves a Best Picture Oscar nomination? Mainly, I don't think Joker has much to say. Joker is kind of a remake but more of a homage to Taxi Driver and King of Comedy, two films which looked at unhinged characters living in a fairly unforgiving world and how they maneuver through a world which has turned their backs on them. Don't get me wrong, it's a fantastic homage, but I feel Joker lacks subtlety. Throughout the duration of Joker, the film constantly reminds us that Arthur has mental health issues and always reminds us that Gotham doesn't care about treating the people in need. These two factors are constantly told to the audience so they don't forget the message of the film, instead of simply telling the story and allowing the performances of the actors, the work of the score and cinematography to show us what the message is of this film. It's as if Todd Phillips constantly wants to remind us that, hey, I'm making a serious film here, talking about serious issues. Don't forget that, this is serious. I once did The Hangover, but now look what I'm doing, dramas. And I think that's where the film lets itself down. It's trying to say a lot about society without actually really saying anything, and sparked all those damn society memes. This, I really feel, is down to the bad direction from Todd Phillips, who got a Best Direction nomination. A scene which I actually really enjoyed in Joker and wish there was more of in this film is the opening scene, where we see Arthur for the first time. Outside the world is dirty, and the bridge outside the window makes it feel the world is not particularly open outside, and adds to the enclosed feeling of the small room Arthur is in. The radio plays and talks of the problems surrounding Gotham. From what we learn, Arthur works as a clown but is evidently not happy and struggling with some inner turmoil. Follow that by Arthur's uneasy laughing, and we have learned everything we need to know about the setting of this film and our lead character. The scene has subtlety, which is something I wish this film had more of. One scene later, we are given probably the least subtle scene I've ever seen, in which a bunch of kids beat up Arthur while shouting "beat him up," and kick our hero while shouting "kick him." I think this really shows the level of restraint Todd Phillips brought to this project, which is basically none. He can't ever allow a scene to breathe and has to constantly remind us that this world is bad and bad things are happening to our protagonist. I read an article by Insider recently whilst making this video, and in that article it described Joker as exactly the sort of film to bridge the gap between auteur cinema and mainstream blockbusters. Whilst it is probably the first instance of a comic book film trying to be more of a character study rather than a big action blockbuster, which is something I've always wanted to see, and this particularly works with a character like Joker. I felt throughout Todd Phillips tries to distance the film away from its comic book origins. Joker gives off the sensation that it wants to be seen as edgy and provocative and is an adult take on comic books. This is, as previously mentioned, done through the lack of subtlety from Todd Phillips. It wants to be so much like the films it's paying homage to that Joker basically became in itself a carbon copy of these films without seeking its own identity. Instead of allowing its ideas to breathe and trust the audience to understand the message trying to be told, we are constantly hit over the head with it. Arthur is sick, Gotham is a shithole, and no one cares because society turned his back on it. King of Comedy and Taxi Driver had something to say. We followed these characters throughout their journey, not knowing where they would end up. Arthur's transformation into a mass murderer is inevitable. It's something the world does to him. As a result of its passivity, the story becomes little more than Arthur suffering a string of hardships until we know he becomes the Joker. It swiftly grows predictable, then repetitive, then just ultimately dull. I've always said, I have felt, if Joker wasn't the name of this film, people wouldn't think so highly of it. It's because of the attached comic book name that people are seeing this film as much better than it is, when really it has nothing interesting to say. I think one of the major problems is Joker comes off as self-righteous and a feeling of being incredibly relevant, but the message is so basic and presented in such a basic manner, it feels like the film is talking down to the audience in a self-satisfied manner that this film is better than comic books, and we should agree. Now, is Joker a bad film? No. That's not what the message of this video is. I'm merely trying to point out its faults as to why it should not be nominated for a Best Picture Oscar. But of course, the Academy eats up a film like this because it's seen as the smart take on comic book characters. If you ask most comic book fans, or even just normal film fans, which film they enjoyed more, Endgame or Joker, I reckon majority would say Endgame, myself included. So why shouldn't Endgame be nominated? In my opinion, what Endgame has done for cinema is far greater than anything Joker will do. And in 20, 30 or 40 years, people will still talk about Endgame and its achievements for big blockbuster filmmaking. And its incredible achievement of telling a story spread over 10 years and pulling it off. And it will change the landscape of how films are made and gave birth to the cinematic universe, and how that this style of storytelling can work. This compared to a film which copied many previous films to send the same message as those films, but just with a far heavier hand. I enjoyed Joker, I truly did. It's a great film supported by a fantastic performance by Joaquin Phoenix, who thoroughly deserves his Best Actor nomination. It's an amazingly shot film with an incredible score, of which Joker deserves its nominations in these categories, but nominations for Best Picture and Best Director feels hollow, as if the Academy just ate up the fact that this was a superhero film which wasn't presenting itself as one. This was smarter than that. This was similar to some of the greatest films ever made, and the world agreed. Joker wants to be a smart film, but it's not smart because it constantly reminds you of how smart it is trying to be, instead of just telling the story it wants to. Films like Dolma Is My Name and especially Uncut Gems were far more deserving of a Best Picture nod compared to Joker. Joker always felt like a film that was looking for the Best Picture nomination. It was always trying to hit those story beats of why a film gets nominated for a Best Picture, instead of just simply telling its story. I think of all the Best Picture nominations this year, Joker is the one that fits the category of it's just a film made to win awards. It's not trying to tell a message, it's just trying to get that Best Picture nomination, which of course just makes it very hollow and not deep at all. Instead of earning its nomination, Joker simply said, we should be nominated, which for me is always a reason of why you should never be nominated for the Best Picture Oscar. I do think Joker does have a big chance of winning the Best Picture, which I think would be a real shame because I think there's been some fantastic films this year, and in 10 years people won't really be talking about this film anymore, and they'll be talking more about films like Uncut Gems, 1917, and maybe even The Irishman. Joker is a good film, but it isn't the best film, and this for me is why The Joker should not have been the most nominated film at the Oscars this year, and especially not the Best Picture nomination. Thank you for watching.